Hello and welcome back to The Cup That Cheers. I'm Elizabeth, and today we are beginning our series of videos that have to do with beginning hand sewing, specifically the kinds of tools that you need when you're first starting out.
Now, when I say the right equipment, I don't mean the most expensive equipment. I don't mean the most complicated equipment. I don't mean that you have to go out and buy every single thing in the fabric store in order to get started. There are really only a few things that you absolutely need to get started. And as you decide on different projects and you start doing research as to what you need and how to do it, other additions of equipment and tools will become apparent.
In this video, I'm going to be talking about the first three things that I gave my students: a container to put things in, scissors and the different types of scissors that there are and that you should have, and needles.
So the first thing that you're going to need, the very first thing, is something to keep everything in. So you could do any number of things. You could have a sewing box from the fabric store. You could reuse a basket that somebody gave you that had a plant in it. You could use a shoebox. You could use a makeup bag, like this one is. You could use a clear box with a lid. So something that is solid, doesn't have holes in it. It's a good idea if that container is clear so you can see what's in there. It's not necessary, but it's helpful. What is necessary is that whatever you have in there can be kept in there. So if your container gets tipped over, everything doesn't fall out. So a makeup bag has a zip on the top. That's a good choice for a container. Shoebox has a lid. That's a good choice for a container. You can even go to the dollar store and get those clear plastic shoeboxes with a lid that clips down to the top. That's also really good. And of course, there is the ever popular already used recycled biscuit or cookie tin. It has a nice tightly fitting lid, which is good. And cookie tins have been so popular over the years that there's a running joke among people who sew and people who do crafts that if you are in the home of a crafter or someone who sews or someone who does any kind of handicraft or hobby that involves pieces of things and small tools, and you happen to see a cookie tin or a biscuit tin in their house, chances are, or at least there's a 50% chance or greater, that there aren't going to be any cookies in that tin. It's just going to be tools, or it's going to be buttons, or it's going to be bits and pieces of whatever project they're working on, like quilt squares or yarn or knitting needles, crochet hooks, any kind of thing like that. What you really just want to do is make sure that your container is big enough to hold everything, that it's sturdy, it's not going to let anything fall out, that there's a lid. Once you have something to put all of your tools in, you need to start thinking about the tools that you're going to use. And the first tool that I'm going to talk about is scissors. You're going to need two different kinds of scissors. You're going to need fabric scissors, and you're going to need scissors that you're going to use for everything else. Why do you need two different kinds of scissors? Because fabric is difficult to cut, and you need to make sure, these are my fabric scissors, you need to make sure that the scissors that you use are the right shape for cutting fabric, and I'll talk about that in a bit, as well as they're very sharp and that they stay sharp. And the way they stay sharp is you don't use them to cut anything else. Not your paper patterns, not the backing on any trim or anything. Don't use your fabric scissors to cut packages open, to cut plastic, to cut wire. That is a really good way to ruin the blade. And blades that are ruined by cutting plastic and cutting wire are really, really hard to repair. Really difficult to repair, and they may be impossible to repair. So I suggest that you get a pair of scissors that are made for cutting fabric, and they will have this shape. And you can see that there are the blades here, and the blades make basically a straight line through the bottom handle, and then the top handle is up at an angle. And so it has this angle. So when you're holding it, your hand is like this. That is so that when you are cutting fabric, the fabric is of course going to be laid out on a flat surface. And if you pick the fabric up when you're cutting it, it's going to flop. Fabric is floppy. It does that. It's going to flop down. It's going to get in the way of the scissors. You're going to make cuts where you don't want to. And that's a really good way also to just cut an inaccurate line, cut a line that's going to make a real problem for your project. So what you do is you keep your fabric flat on the surface as much as you can, and you slide your hand as flat as possible without lifting up the fabric as much as possible as you're cutting it. And the only way you can do that is with scissors that are shaped like this. Now this particular scissors is with the Fiskars brand. It's probably the most common brand that's available, at least in my area of California, and it's a decent brand. It's not the best quality, and especially with the plastic handles are not the best quality. Plastic can break over time. I actually have had a pair of scissors, not fabric scissors, but a pair of craft scissors break on me because it had a plastic handle and I was cutting something like cardboard that was hard to cut through, and the end of the blades that was embedded in the handle broke through the plastic and scratched my hand. So beware when you are using fabric scissors. It's another reason why you only cut fabric with fabric scissors, because if you have a plastic handle, which tends to be more comfortable than a metal handle, but if you have a plastic handle, there's less danger of that happening. Now, a good set of fabric scissors can be sharpened, and so with this brand of scissors, they can be sharpened, and the way you'll know that they can be sharpened is you turn it around, and there should be a little screw right here where the two blades hinge together. And if there is, then chances are you can take your scissors to a knife sharpener or a scissor sharpener, and they can take that screw out and separate the two blades and sharpen them as if they were knives and put them back together. And that's how you make your scissors last longer. And you might need to do that every couple years, maybe once every 10 years, if you're very careful to use your fabric scissors only on fabric. And if they started out being a good quality metal in the blades so that it's not too soft, it won't lose its sharpness too quickly. So these are fabric scissors. You'll need to make sure that you mark them. I've just tied a red ribbon around it, but you need to make sure you know, especially if your paper scissors and your fabric scissors otherwise look the same or similar, mark them and make sure everybody knows these are only for cutting fabric and thread only. I've heard of people who threaten death to people who use fabric scissors on anything other than fabric. I would not recommend going that far, but especially if you have upgraded to a really, really nice set of fabric shears that are expensive, I can see how people would be upset for other people just using them to cut open a package and then ruining the blades. So these are scissors. Now, the upgrade for scissors is going to an all metal pair of scissors. You can upgrade, you can find them online, you can get some really nice scissors on eBay that are all stainless steel. One thing about them is that they're heavier than the ones that have the plastic handles on them. Sometimes that can help because you don't have to squeeze your hand as much to close the blades. You just kind of release your pressure and the handles close on their own a little bit, which if you have a lot of cutting to do, that could come in handy. But those kinds of scissors are the ones that will last for generations because there isn't any plastic to break. All you need to do is have them sharpened and maybe oiled at that screw joint if they start getting tight or not wanting to move very easily, and they will last you for a long time. I've even heard of scissors that are made of the same material and sharpened in the same way that samurai swords are. Now that's a pretty cool upgrade, but it's also pretty expensive, and I don't know anybody who has those. I certainly don't. But just to give you an idea of what is available and out there. But you don't need to do that. Start out just going to the fabric section in Walmart, if your Walmart has a fabric section, or other big box store if they have a fabric section, chances are they'll have some kind of sewing scissors, sewing shears, fabric scissors, and just start with those. You can always upgrade. Now, for our friends who are left-handed sewing scissors and fabric scissors are a thing. Unfortunately, they're not as easy to find and readily available in most stores as right-handed sewing scissors, but they are a thing and they are available and they are useful. So you can try using the regular sewing and fabric scissors, which are made for right-handed people, and see how that works for you. It's probably going to be very awkward. My students who are left-handed found it very awkward to use right-handed sewing and fabric scissors, so I bought them left-handed ones. And they are available. Every major manufacturer of fabric shears will have a left-handed version, so you can go find one and buy it. It probably will be slightly more expensive, unfortunately, than the right-handed sewing shears, simply because they make fewer of them, and it's a smaller amount of people wanting left-handed. But that doesn't mean you can't get them, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't. If you feel that right-handed scissors are really annoying, get the left-handed ones. Now, those are fabric scissors. You will also need craft scissors. These ones are not anything that you should be spending a lot of money on. You should be getting these maybe from the craft store or from Walmart or any place that sells little packs of scissors. And you'll notice that these are slightly different shape than the fabric scissors. The blades make a straight line, and it basically goes in between the upper part of the handle and the lower part of the handle. That is because these are made for cutting paper or other things that you can hold up in the air and cut with. So this is what you would be using for cutting your paper patterns with, cutting trim, cutting anything that is not fabric or thread that has to do with your project. Again, be careful when cutting hard things, like if you're using silk flowers that are on a wire and you need to cut through the wire. I recommend that you get wire cutters and use that instead of these scissors, because those can the wire can break any kind of plastic handle on scissors. But basically anything else that you need to cut, use paper scissors, use craft scissors, and these ones you don't have to be as careful about because they're a lot easier to find, they're less expensive. So another thing you're going to need, of course, is needles and thread. And when you buy needles, in California anyway, you usually buy them in a package that looks like that, or in a small round case. And once you start looking at needles, you'll start to notice that there are lots of different sizes and lots of different shapes of needles. That's because when you start sewing more than one type of project, you can adjust the size and shape of the needle that you use to make your project go faster or easier. In general, the size of the needle should be adjusted to the thickness and weight of the fabric and the thickness of the thread that you're using. Now, what do I mean by that? If you're using very thin, very fine fabric like tulle or like charmeuse or China silk or batiste, this is a very finely woven, a fine fabric, very lightweight. The tulle is loosely woven, but the batiste is not. And especially when you get to a finely woven fabric that is also light, that means the threads that are used to make the fabric are very, very fine and thin. And if you use a needle that's too big, it's going to poke a hole that's the size of the needle through the fabric, but that hole is going to be big enough to be visible once your project is done. And if you put pins in your fabric, or you have to take out a stitch or something, that's going to leave holes, which may or may not be able to be sort of zhuzhed back into place. The threads might not be able to be moved back into place because they may have been pushed out of the way so much. So you're going to need, if you're going to use fabric that's like that, you need to make sure that you use a very thin, fine needle. Conversely, if you're using very heavy fabric like canvas or denim, you're going to need to use a bigger, thicker needle, because the small needle is going to get lost in the fabric. It's probably also going to bend as you try to put it through the fabric over and over as you're stitching. So you'll need to choose a larger needle for that. Now, I said needles come in sizes, and the different sizes are numerical. Size 1 needles are large needles. Size 12 needles are the small needles. It's kind of like an inverse relationship. You might think that a larger number means a bigger needle, but that's not the case. It has to do with how many needles of that size, how many needles of that size can the manufacturer get from a given amount of metal. So if they can only get 1 or 2 needles, then those 2 needles are going to be big, fairly big. If they can get 12 needles out of that same amount of metal, those needles are going to be small. In general, you want to, when you're starting out, choose with a mid-size, start with a mid-size needle. Those needles are usually called sharps or universal needles. That's what this package is. And it'll say on the package if the needles are sized, or it will have something like the word sharps, or it will say for general use or something like that. So that's the size that you're going to start with, because that is the most useful size. And if, as you're working with it, if you feel like the needle's bending, and that means it's too thin, or it's getting lost in the fabric, that means you need to use a bigger needle. Or if it's poking really big holes in the fabric and it's looking really weird, then try to find a smaller needle. But in general, you start with the mid-size general use needles. Now, needles have different shapes, as you will notice when you start looking at them. The sharps not only refers to the size, but it also refers to the shape of the needle. A needle that is designated a sharp needle has a sharp point, because some needles have blunt points for different kinds of projects like tapestry or rug making or various other things. But they also have a small eye, and they're used with kind of all-purpose thread is the size of thread that you could be using with them. And they can be used for most different kinds of fabric. So start with those. Like I said, different needles have different shapes, different sizes, and they're for different purposes. So I can link some of the other videos online that I found talking about needles and their needle sizes and what that all means if you're interested in that. So some needles come in a packet like this, in which case you bend the top back, and then you should be able to slide the needles out through the little gap in the top. I don't happen to have one of those needle cases with me, but the other common way of buying needles, at least in California, is in a round plastic case that has a clear cover, and it has little compartments inside it with different sizes of needles in it. And my students had a hard time opening those cases. That's how I gave them all their needles. They had a hard time opening because they were trying to open the case and take the lid off. And in a case like that, the lid does not come off, it rotates. So what you would do is you would hold the case in your hand. Well, pretend that I have a case, these are pins, but pretend that I have a case of needles in my hand, and you would rotate around and look at the edge. And on the edge at one point, there will be a little opening. And what you do to get the needles out of there is to rotate the lid until that opening is on top of the compartment that has the needles in it that you want. And then once you do that, then you just tip the whole thing, the needles will slide out, you can take the needle out, and then make sure to reverse rotate that lid so that the compartments are not open, so that the hole in the lid is not open on top of any of the compartments and are going to let any of the needles just fall out.
Thanks for joining me today as we learned about the first 3 tools that I think are important for beginner hand sewers to have. Join me next time when we talk about the next 3 things on my list of tools that beginning hand sewers need to have: thread, pins, and pin cushions. See you next time.